This hack is going to require us to delve into the mysterious world of Max for Live. And if you haven't done so already, well, if you own Ableton Live Suite, you actually have Max for Live if you haven't downloaded it already. All you have to do is go to ableton.com and go to your account, and you'll see you actually have a download there for Max for Live. If you don't have Ableton Live Suite, that's okay. If you're interested, you can purchase Max for Live separately. But if you do have it, I want to show you a free device that you have available to yourself. This is from a pack of devices called the Max for Live Essentials Pack, which can be found on ableton.com. Here's a little view of the web page for you. And you can download it for free. Again, you have to own Max for Live though, and if you do, you can download it for free. And it comes with this really great device called LFO. And LFO is simply a low frequency oscillator, and we can map it to modulate literally anything on the screen, which is pretty radical. So what I've done for this example is I've got two drum loops here. This is an audio drum loop that I've put together for a sample pack. It's kind of a chord drum beat, kick snare, a couple of toms and cowbells and things like that. And then I wanted to add a little layer of something else to it. So in a drum rack, I put together a shaker and a tambourine sound, and that's going to just layer this kind of straight 16th note percussion pattern over the top of it. So together, we have these two elements. So what I was thinking of doing, because the shakers right now is very kind of just static, and there's not a lot of movement to it, I wanted to use my Max for Live LFO to add a little bit of movement to it. So if you've installed the Max for Live Essentials Pack, you can find the LFO under the Max for Live category in the browser under Max Audio Effect. We see it here, LFO. Just a quick side note, if you do download the Essentials Pack, you'll notice that under the Max MIDI Effect folder, you're going to see LFO MIDI comes with this as well. This is the exact same device. The only difference between this one is it will pop in before an instrument on a MIDI track, and the LFO under Max Audio Effect, this will show up just after it like a normal audio effect would. But both of them are going to do the exact same thing. It's just where do you want to see it positioned on your chain of devices. I'm just using the audio version here. But anyway, you can see as I drag it in, it's literally just showing me right now a sine wave LFO, and we can see it moving. And as I adjust the rate, we can see how the rate changes. It's nice because it's super visual. And the other cool thing about this is we can map it to a parameter, and we'll start to see that parameter moving as well, and we can kind of dial in exactly how far we want it to move. So what I was thinking of doing here is, actually before we map anything to the LFO, let's bring in another audio effect. I'm going to grab the grain delay effect. And this grain delay effect, this is kind of a wacky one. Right now on my shakers, let's stop the other beat for a second. On my shakers, it's not really sounding like all that much is happening, but if we start to take this pitch control here, we can start to do sort of this crude detuning of the drum samples. And I'm thinking of using the LFO to modulate that parameter there. So in order to map the LFO to a parameter, all we got to do is click this map button. You'll notice it starts blinking. And whatever control I click on a device, on the mixer, even if I go over to another track, I can modulate something on another track if I want to. But any control I click on, like the pitch for example, is going to start moving and getting modulated in the way that this LFO tells it to get modulated. So I think we'll leave it at a sine wave, but let's maybe slow the rate down a bit. Let's actually hear how this sounds. Let's play our clip back. So I can turn the rate down so it slows the speed of the LFO. And then the depth is going to tell it how far to move around. So let's dial that back a little bit as well. Let's hear this now with our beat. Now instead of just a shaker loop that's hitting on straight 16th notes, we have more of this rhythmic, almost texture loop. And if we want to, we can sync this to tempo as well, because right now it's just moving in hertz. If I click this frequency button, it'll give us synced rates. Maybe we'll go 1 bar. So then we get this full range of the pitch movement that I've dialed in with depth over the course of 1 bar. And this is sounding a lot cooler now, I think. Now another thing I was thinking of doing is perhaps adding another LFO device. So let's go back to our browser, Max for Live, Max Audio Effect, LFO. Doesn't matter where we throw it in. And let's map this perhaps to the volume, the mixer volume here for this shaker rack. So let's, again, click map. You'll notice the button starts blinking, and we'll just click on the volume control here, and we see the volume now moving up and down like crazy. Let's slow the rate down a little bit. Let's sync this one to tempo as well. So I'm going to click the frequency button so it changes to sync. Let's maybe do this on 1/2 bar. And we can switch the LFO's wave from here. Let's do a, what do we got here? Let's do an upward facing saw wave. So then we're going to get this gradual ramping up of the volume. Let's turn the depth down a bit so it doesn't crank the volume over 0 dB by too much. Couple of other nifty controls here. You've got this jitter control, and if you start to turn that up, that'll randomize the shape a little bit. So you can have this slightly imperfect rising of the saw wave. If we go really high on it, it just becomes total chaos. And then this smooth control will make it so that the edges of any jagged LFO wave become a little bit more rounded. You can see here that happening on the saw wave. Just for a little bit smoother movement. Maybe a little bit of smoothness, not too much, kind of like in the saw wave shape here. So again, the cool thing about this LFO device is you can map it to any control you see on screen. I mentioned earlier we can also map it to, let's just, for the sake of example here, we can map it to stuff on other tracks as well. So maybe even send levels, volume levels, mute switches, pan position. I can map it here. Even though this is on the shakers track, we can map it to the panning of the drums track. So you can map anything on screen. If you click away from the LFO, you can still map anything, any devices that were on this track as well. So it's really, really flexible. And it's a great way to just add all kinds of movement and modulation to different parameters, whether it's volume or pitch of drums like we're doing here, whether it's a parameter on a synthesizer that the LFO on that synthesizer can't normally modulate. So this is going to give you a lot of flexibility to add in more movement to sounds and things that you wouldn't otherwise have the ability to do so. So I encourage you to dive in and experiment with it. I'll give you this basic session to play around with. And hopefully I've given you a couple of ideas to get started with, but really the sky's the limit with this thing. So have fun with it. Take care.